the visions that we see in other parts of the world. For example, the vision that Amazon puts on with the cloud computing and their view on how to provide services through the cloud. And there are visions, part of the visions which are clearly mapping to each other, but of course there are also quite some differences, which I'll be happy to share then later in the discussion. So that's the vision, and it really set the stage. Now I dive a little bit into it and chat a little bit about what it then means in some more detail. So I talked about the connectivity services. Compute resources as a service is becoming reality, so that's part of the cloud computing aspect that we have to take into consideration. Although we see again also not only technical aspects of the cloud, as I mentioned yesterday, there's a socio-economic aspect to the cloud services to be provided, because the provisioning gets even more virtual than before. And we can raise questions that are centered around taxation of services, and related to that, practically the question about income for societies, income for the governments, and therefore for the societies can be discussed in that context. Because if I don't know where the service is being provided, I don't know where to tax it. And if I can't tax it, I don't get tax income, right? And if all my services will now be provisioned through the network, at the end of the day, I have no handle really where should I put the tax mark on in order to get the tax money into the tax department. That's just one example. You may say, I don't want to pay tax. That's a great idea. But we should ask ourselves then, who's paying for the infrastructure we're living in? Because as we're human beings, we can't live in the internet. We still need to live in this in the classical real world, right? So there's a question on how to manage that part of the world if the virtual part of the world is moving into that direction. Big topic in Europe right now, open question, and it's part of the overall discussion that we have to take. Horizontal services, such as identity, trust, and scalability, I mentioned that. Then it becomes clear that what started with the Web 2.0 is now being enlarged and enriched by a big topic that has been up for many, many years. If you have been in artificial intelligence, you may say we did that for 20 years or 30 years already. Nevertheless, now the topic about semantic technologies is becoming more and more closer to be used in context of the internet. The semantic web, as Tim Berners-Lee coined it many years ago, seems to become reality and seems to be important in order to provide these kinds of services in a way that we are not searching for services, but rather finding the services we're looking for. And that Internet of Service, I think, is now the killer app to justify what we all call service-oriented architecture, SOA. SOA has been up for quite some time now, for about, 5 years. And people, there have been camps who are completely believing into it, and there have been people saying, why do we need SOA at all? And with the Internet of Services, it's becoming obvious that the only way how enterprises can interact among each other is by exposing their services to each other. And so what we call in SAP the enterprise SOA will now be exposed. We call it internally in SAP Research Enterprise SOA 2.0, will be exposed to the internet, and the inter-enterprise communication will largely depend on the service-oriented architecture. And we'll all be happy that we have started that journey 5 years ago in the intra-enterprise, and those who have done that will be ready for the inter-enterprise service-oriented architecture. And then I would like to refer to the last two topics related to the Internet of Things. We have new devices coming up, particular sensor nodes and embedded systems are now being integrated into the internet. Embedded systems are out for many years. That's not the big thing. The big thing is that these embedded systems now get connected more and more, and that the sensor nodes are coming into play allows us to understand the context of an object, the context of a human being. May it be the location it's based, may it be the environment it's in. These are important aspects to really get what is being called the real world awareness. As I said, we need common global standards in the network and service infrastructure, like the protocol question that I raised. And the European Commission, together with ISTAC, have concluded that there is a new way on how research needs to happen. And I think Google gives us a good example to that. Yeah? Pushing out alpha and beta versions of software seems to be the new way on how to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So if that is the case, we have also to question, at least we at the industrial research organizations or us at the universities, we have to ask ourselves, how do we expose our results? How quickly can we generate impact? What is the new way? And the European Commission and ISTAC believes there have to be large scale and generic test beds to be made available to the research community so that we can quickly elaborate on that. We are leaving the period where research could work for 3, 4, 5 years before it gets started to be explored and exploited and somewhat investigated on whether it's being useful and turn into innovation. We have to have cycles which is practically in months time frame, and we push it on the net, we try it out, we get some feedback, we change it, and we push it back again. So this is a true belief that needs to be supported, that requires certain infrastructures and certain business models also to work on. I mentioned trust already, and as I said, we concluded that there has to be forums and dialogue with all stakeholders in the future in parallel to the technology research at as early stage as possible. I mentioned a couple of examples. Object identification as one of it, IP addresses another example of it, more from the socioeconomic aspect in this context, as well as the question about cloud computing and virtualization of and the impact to the society. This all is not in a vision that is just out there for in 10 years. It's part of reality today. Here are examples of where software as a service is already starting to emerge into this Internet of Services. And this work has largely been conducted here in Brisbane by our colleagues from SAP Research, also together with our colleagues from the QUT. And what we will see is that these examples will all emerge in this bigger picture of Internet of Services. So I'm not talking about futuristic aspects, I'm talking of something becoming real now in the next 5 years. What we see in this global world of Internet of Services is that there are new roles being identified that we have to deal with. We are here in our lab in Brisbane have identified this service value chain with these 4 different kind of roles that we can anticipate, from a service gateway that makes services available through an aggregator that is capable to compose these services, as I mentioned earlier, a broker that allows to broker and bill these services, make them tradable goods, and finally providing this through multiple service channels to the service consumer, so in a customer-specific manner. Of course, you can envision that some companies will take several of these roles, as you can also envision that companies will be focused dedicatedly to one of these roles. And we have to look now into this in more depth and trying to understand how these core business services I mentioned in the second layer have to be provided in order to play any of this role, because that's where we expect the web-based service industry will be heading for. To summarize and give you a conclusion on the Internet of Services, it's extending today's Internet to become service-enabled and will allow enterprises to reach out, as I said, to global markets. I gave you examples on this as the car insurance company, and to focus, and that's important, on their core competencies. So companies do not have to have the whole solution in place. Through the mechanism of aggregation, they will be able to compose other services from other companies into their services so that they can rely on others in order to make it happen. We at SAP Research consider such a network of business partners a business web, which allows to come